I work at a very good company called Wi-Fi Dabba with a funny name, Wi-Fi Dabba, right? So I identify as a full stack developer, and my pronouns are front end and back end, right? So basically, I'm from Mumbai. I like programming. I like to do a lot of stuff. And today, I'm here to discuss all my problems which have a solution. So I want to share it with you guys. So basically, I came across this topic called caching. So we had an internal dashboard, which is basically monitoring around like 5,000 or more routers. So our company is an ISP in Bangalore, and it has around 60% of Bangalore's co-living spaces as properties. So our routers are installed in these properties, right? So this is my motivation to give this talk. So I'll just share the screen and let's start it off. Oh, you know already, right? So yeah, so when we were about to revamp the whole dashboard, the first thing that came to my mind is, oh wow, they have written React code on client side. Why don't I just do a little bit of tweaks, get some good salary, and go home and sleep, right? the Then I started watching YouTube, and someone was ranting about how Next.js pages router is bad, and how it has made their life hell, right? And so, like any other developer, I just went to Reddit to do more research, and turns out it was true. So these are some points that actually came into my mind when I was thinking about Pages Router. So just to give a disclaimer, I know there are multiple frameworks out there like Remix, Astro, in fact, Quick as well. But my comparison is going to be more with the Pages router. So let's go with it. So the first problem was with how Pages router works. So Pages router, it's like marriage, it's committing with the code. It's basically like it caches either everything or nothing. The second is like, what is the weird way of getting props and shit like that? So for example, get static props, get server side props, get initial props. What is all this? I mean, it's weird, right? So, and this problem itself is the biggest problem that I faced while writing the pages router, which is Next.js 12 or before. It had a pages router in it, right? So type of window is undefined. So whenever you write something inside use effect, you have to check whether the window is available or not. And only after that you can do anything on client side. And then the route management is there. It was able to cache, but it was not able to pre-render some pages. So this is my problem with the route management over here. Okay, so this is how a generic SSR based framework works, whether it's Vite SSR or Next.js SSR. So the guy who was speaking before me, I guess his name is Alo, he mentioned FCP, which is first contentful paint. So what happens when you write CSR, which is client-side rendered React, right? Whenever you see the root of the project, so it's basically a div, and then inside your div, the whole app tree is loaded, correct? So if you go to your index.html inside React, there's a ID called hash root on the div. So that's where the culprit lies. So basically, on front end, the whole browser is responsible to load all your components in CSR. And basically, when you go to the browser and load the page, you'll see initially there's a white screen, and then that weird white screen stays for like a couple of seconds, and then the whole page starts to load. So that's your CSR. To counter that problem of FCP, which is first contentful paint, the guys came up with Next.js pages router, or SSR, which is server side rendering. So if you see, the HTML is generated on the server and then pushed to the browser. And here you can see that Street Fighter guy, Ryu, which means the initial page load is just the HTML, which is not interactive. But you know what is the cost of that? We are sending the JavaScript that we had on our server on the browser itself. So if you see, there's a JS bundle sent to the client over here, and then it goes to the client, then it executes, and then there's a process of reconciliation. Oh my God, what is this technical jargon? Reconciliation. Oh shit, how difficult this is. So reconciliation is nothing but it's a diffing algorithm. So the folks who are interviewing, reconciliation is one of the most important questions in interview. So it's basically whenever you hydrate your components, so whenever the server sends JavaScript from backend to front end, the front end got to know where all the events are from. So which components on click belong to, which components are using use states. So that process of diffing and basically re-rendering the page goes from reconciliation. Okay, and then after that, you get an interactive website. So if you check in reality, SSR is slower than CSR. It's just giving you a good FCP, that's all. But CSR is much faster when compared to SSR. Whoops. Yeah. So coming back to the app router. So what app router changed exactly? So they rewrote the fetch API. And most of the community was angry with guys at Vercel. So Next.js is owned by Vercel. So they were like, why did you rewrote the whole fetch API? Anyways, we won't use it. We use Axios, right? So the new changes that are in fetch API right now are the capability of caching and revalidating the caches, right? So the first thing, event-based revalidation, and the second thing is time-based revalidation. I'll show you more on the next slide. Yeah, so there's a React OG on Twitter and Reddit. His name is Dan Abramov. So he has explained in a very good way about what is function of states versus what is function of data. So anything that is loaded on client side. So for example, let's take this scenario, right? I'm making a fetch call, and we can clearly see that I'm using set data. So anything that is loaded on client side use states. But on contrary, anything that is loaded on server side, which means React server components, it uses function of data. You see in this code snippet, there's no state management over there. You can just load the fetch API call and then basically render it out on your screen. All these things can happen on server. It doesn't happen on the client side. The best part is it uses request memoization. So what the hell is request memoization? Wow. I've heard about React.memo. I've heard about use memo. What is request memoization? So basically, imagine there's a scenario where we are using this function called const res, right? So let's say we made an API call once, and then we want to use the variable of that API call twice. Now you would think that, okay, because I'm using this variable twice, I'm calling the function twice. But that's not the exact case. In reality, what's happening is in the whole life cycle of React component, the API call is just made once, and then the results are cached. And whenever you use the variable the second time, it reuses the results that were fetched for the first time. That's all. So this is how request memoization works. Then guys at Next were like, oh shit, request memoization is good thing. Why don't we extend it? So they came up with something called a new fetch. Basically, they just wrote a polyfill. So whenever you write something which is native to, let's say, JavaScript, someone told you write JavaScript promises again. That's a polyfill. So they wrote a fetch polyfill, and now they included caching and revalidation, things like those, right? So now what happens is whenever you make an API call, you make an API call once, and it's cached throughout the whole server's lifecycle, not a component's lifecycle. So that's a new change in the fetch API of Next.js app router. Okay. You know what? Just ignore the whole diagram. I copied it from the Next documentation. It's very tiny. I cannot even see. The whole thing that's I need to explain you guys is whenever you make an API call, you can revalidate it based upon time. So like I told you, in my company, we have to monitor more than 5,000 routers at the same time. So we do check the data consumed on each router. We do check who are these users who are using our routers. So there is like, like TBs of data is generated, right? So we revalidate our data mostly in 6 hour span. So if you are living in one of the co-living spaces where Wi-Fi data is available, you know who to follow, right? Don't trouble me. So this is what's happening behind the scenes. We revalidate the data. Yeah. So now app router is in play. So this is a basic model of how your web page looks. So there's a streaming server component, there's a server component, and there's a client component. So the gray areas are streaming server components. How many of you have heard about suspense? Can you raise your hand? Suspense, right? So now here the app router creates a big confusion. Is app router similar to Astro, where they are using islands architecture? Is app router similar to resumability architecture of Quick? Which one is it? So it's basically the combination of both worlds, right? So the app router basically caches your HTML on build time. So let's say you have a you created a page with dynamic and static components in it, right? So all these static components get cached while the page is building. So on the build time, and these pages get cached and get into a JSON file, which is React server component payload. So this JSON file which says React server component payload gives the information to the client, right? And the whole green thing, right? It's just a slot to load your client later on. And it has a big drawback. I'll just come after this. So your header component over here is this gray, which means let's say you load this page. First, you'll get all the cached components, which are in blue. Then you load your client-side component. And let's say in that time, the component that was rendering on server didn't get the fetch done. It will still load on the front end. That's the beauty of it. So this is called ISR, which is incremental static revalidation, right? So basically, these are some components in app router. So React server component static, React server component dynamic, and React client side component. So static are the components that are cached during the build phase. Dynamic are the components. Basically, whenever you need to revalidate it, it will keep on updating, and the client will keep on fetching these data. And there is one client side component which has drawbacks, like I told you earlier. So yeah, this is all it is. Okay. So this is the fun part. So now some people came to me. I had an argument with one of the people, and in the crowd, he's sitting over here. He mentioned that the Next.js pages router also caches. But like I told you earlier, Next.js pages router is a bit funny situation. It's like getting married to a girl, committing 100%. Either it is cached or it's not cached at all. So this is the situation that comes with the Next.js pages router. So now there are two revalidation techniques that app router has. One is dynamic revalidation, and there is revalidate. So basically what revalidate is, I think we should see it with one demo. Um, yep, we should see it with demo. Okay, so this is the basic code of to-dos, which is fetching the data from the Prisma DB, which is running locally. So this is something that I'm going to do. I'm going to show you three scenarios where revalidation happens, where we are actually caching the data on the server and the data isn't called again. Sorry, the data isn't fetched again. I'm going to show you how the data does not mutate or data does not change inside your list component whenever you add a new to-do. So all the things that app router people have done are deliberate, and I just want to show you some use cases over here. The thing is, most of you will have this question, why to-do list? So I think most of the React developers over here, when they did their first project, it was a to-do list. I'm pretty sure about that. So let's get going. So as you can see in the create folder, right, inside to-dos, there is a function called update item, and which has a directive called use server. Isn't it weird? Like we are using an update item inside use server. There's something called form data. I mean, what's exactly happening, right? I'll just make it bigger for you guys. So if you see form, there's a prop called action. It takes update item, and then it's actually redirecting to to-dos. And to-dos is this page, right? So I'll just run it for you guys and I'll show it to you. Yeah. So as you can see, there are multiple to-dos over here. I'm going to create one to-do and show you one side effect that whenever you add a to-do, because there's no cache revalidation, it won't allow us to add a new to-do. Okay. So that's what we are going to do. So let's just see it. Someone from my dreams. So as you can see, there's no give a talk over here. Even if I try to refresh, I don't think it will work. So let's try and refresh. Yep, there's nothing. Because the React app router has cached the whole page. Now it's in your control to revalidate the whole cache system whenever you make an entry inside the to-dos. So let's try and do that. It's really simple. Uh, yeah, so this is really simple. Most of you might think why I'm building the project again and again. The problem is whenever you are in dev mode, you cannot simulate the cache. You need to have production mode on. So every time I need to check anything that has to do with caching, I have to first build the project and then do npm start to test it. Okay. So yeah, let's go ahead. Now you can see because I revalidated on the action of submit, I got the new to do called meet new people. Okay. So I think I'm short on time, like Kiran told, and I'll give the rest of the information just orally. So let's see. All right. So there are multiple directives like this. So let's say you want to revalidate in some span of time. Let's say you want to do it in like a day's time, right? You can use revalidate equals to whatever seconds a day generates, and then you can have those revalidation. It's basically like a cron job, but not a cron job. Then there are other options inside Fetch API. There are some interesting situations that I want to share that I faced. And I think the revalidation techniques are just two. Mostly it's just time-based revalidation and action-based revalidation. There is a lot of complex things that you can do with action-based revalidation and time-based revalidation. I wish I could show it to you because of time constraint, I cannot. So go to next app router docs, Next.js 14 or Next.js 13. I think you'll find some interesting stuff out there. So these are some interesting scenarios that I got into. So the first interesting scenario was if they rewrote the fetch API, what happens if I use Axios or something else? How many of you use Axios in daily life? Raise your hands, right? So the thing is, if fetch API caches everything by default, what will Axios do? Right? Because most of us think that Axios is built on top of fetch, but that's not exactly true. So even if you use Axios or something like GraphQL, it will just behave normally like a next pages router thing, something like that. Then again, the funniest thing that I've ever faced is like we have a GraphQL backend which is actually supporting the mobile app and our my Next.js application, right? So in this scenario, GraphQL is heavily cached based, right? How many of you have worked with GraphQL, especially with Apollo? So let's say you are consuming an API of user. What do you do generally whenever you consume an API which is user specific? What you do is you pass a bearer token inside it, right? Do you tell the client which user you are passing the bearer token for? No, it's generally assumed that whenever the API request is done from browser, a specific browser is acting for a specific client. Am I correct? Right? But how would you do that on server? So that's the biggest challenge with Next.js app router. You need to have some sessions in the place so that you can take the advantage of caching and revalidation. So the biggest drawback that I faced after having app router in production for 6 months is basically this. You cannot cache a GraphQL request on server if it is not a session. You cannot have tokens on server. So millions of users come to my server. I cannot identify which token belongs to which user, correct? Can you tell which token belongs to which user? There's no chance, right? So again, the first problem that I mentioned was with routes in pages router, correct? But over here, there's something interesting going on. So on the build time itself, all the static routes are cached by the Next.js app router. So let's say you are on X route. Whenever you use your link tag and go to a Y route, correct? You generally think that link tag is built on top of a top of anchor tag, which is a tag, right? That's not actually true. Even I thought so. But in reality, what link tag does is whenever you open a link from X location to Y location, it basically does a RPC call to the uh, Next.js backend, and then it loads a prefetched route altogether. So and now you're like, how is the route prefetched? I didn't even think about it. So what happens is initially while giving this talk, I told you about one thing that whenever you yeah. So whenever you load the React server components onto the client, with it goes React server component payload. Payload is just a JSON file that tells what components are where exactly and how they are supposed to be rendered. They can be client components, they can be server components also. So this information is used while using the link tag. And when the link tag is used, it finally makes an RPC call to the backend and fetches the latest page on the client. Okay. So here's the interesting part, right? The whole lecture or whole talk is about how Next.js app router is actually faster than the pages router. In reality, it's not. This is a harsh truth, but in reality, it's not. So you won't get your money back. so 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 this is a weird thing, right? So when you compare everything based upon one API call, right? Let's say every page is making one API call, the app router comes out to be slower, correct? But when you actually compare it logically, so let's say your Next.js pages router will make one API call, and then there is another, and then there is another. Turns out there's a waterfall of API calls that you need to make. So every time a client tries to render something new to the screen, the Next.js pages router will make the API call, increasing the load time, correct? But will that happen in the app router? No, because it always caches first. So whenever you make the API call, even which are dependent, right? It will cache the results and it will keep it throughout the server's lifetime. That's how it is. So in reality, yes, app router is slow when compared to pages router on 1:1 ratio. But whenever you compare it on scale, app router comes out very like it will give you a scale that you cannot imagine. So again, our app router API request cache. What are API requests? He was just talking about the API request, right? How many of you are aware that a Next.js is a full stack framework? You can create your own API routes. Okay, most of you are aware, right? So now the point is you can cache the pages. Can you cache the API routes as well? Turns out all the revalidation logic that I have told you, turns out everything that I have told you till now is also true for the API routes as well. So it's not true. So I've talked to most of people in this meetup. I've talked to one of my best friends, and he always mentions, right. So most of the companies that I have worked with, they do not allow Next.js to consume the data from the DB directly because of the security flaws or something like that. I don't know why team keeps saying there's a security flaw, but they won't tell us what the flaw is. So it's a very funny situation. So now now what is the best thing about this. Let's say you want to make an API call. So what you do generally is you go to Next.js app routers API call. So basically you create a new route and use it as a webhook, right? You want to check when you are making an API call, if the results are different, I want to revalidate, I do not want to cache. There are two options. There is time based revalidation and there is a tag based revalidation, right? So in that scenario, what you need to do is send a tag in param of your API request, and then that's how you solve it. And then use the Next.js API call inside your pages router or app router or wherever you want. It will revalidate it. Oh, yeah, that's it.